Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly O'Horo, and this is Adaptable, Behavior Explained. Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in today to Adaptable. I am going to actually share a little bit of a story that happened for my family and I last Christmas, and hoping to share some of the insights that we gained and some of the lessons that we learned. Please keep in mind that this story is presented just from my perspective, and all of the people that were in the story they'll have their own perspectives, and of course I'm not able to give their perspective, but I'm from the zoomed out perspective of my own and how I see the events that unfolded and how they all impacted our family system in general. And ultimately it was a situation where I would call it holiday gone wrong. We come into the Christmas season expecting things to be a certain way. We have our hopes, we have our plans, and we do our best to set those plans in motion. And of course, people are going to be people, and everybody has different ideas, wants, expectations, etc. And so when you have a complex family system, those will all come into play. And so hopefully you'll hear my story from my Christmas gone wrong last year and be able to glean some insights and maybe make some different choices for you and your own holidays. We did try to hedge some of these things that did happen. But again, we all got together in small spaces over lots of time. And so we ended up with a pretty big family conflict at the end of Christmas Day. And so it starts with, I have 5 sons, and they're all going to be at our house for the holiday season, about a period of 4 or 5 days. And I attempt to put out a schedule and say, here's the things that we're going to do. And my first mistake was I didn't check with everyone to see if those were things that everybody wanted to do and what they wanted to do with their time. I did say, if you want to be at these events, then here's when we're going to do them, and so on and so forth. But mistake number 1 was that I didn't get more of a consensus feeling on what everybody might want to do with the holiday season and what good time, connection, and their downtime needed to look like. So that was the first mistake, although I attempted to have a pretty organized situation. I also wasn't really clear about what my expectations were around the time that we were going to be spending together. In my family system, as the matriarch, I tend to organize everything. I tend to delegate when needed and ask people to pitch in certain ways. And so that's been my role in our family system. But as all of my sons mature and they have their own desires and wishes, I think that some of that really needs to change. And everyone can maybe have more input on the events that we are going to do together. And so that was a little bit of the setup. So I've got one son that's going to come in from the East Coast with his partner. I've got a son that's going to come in from the West Coast over in California, and they're going to come stay at the house. One of the sons has a dog they're going to bring, and so we've got not a very big house, and so we're going to have 2 people, 3 people additional that are going to stay with us plus a dog. And, quite a few of us have expectations on things being a certain way, and we want our environment to look and be a certain way. And so we try to accommodate those sorts of things. So anyways, when it comes to assumptions on how things should be, my one son who had lived in my home was going to be coming home. And, I asked if he wanted to stay in his old room. That's where he lived, not thinking about what everybody else might want. And, the way the room is laid out, although their square footage just about the same, the way the room is laid out, it feels like that one's a little bit bigger. So our first experience on, expectations looks like, can we move rooms? When one couple comes into the house, they wanted to be in a different room. And so what happens in me is I kind of take it personally. I'm thinking to myself, I made the guest room up really nice, and it was for you guys to enjoy, and it's a better bathroom. And I had all of my own thoughts on what would be better for them, and I didn't ask. And part of that was because I assumed, and I kind of still do, that the person that lived in the other room probably should not be displaced because that's where they lived when they grew up. And so those were some of the assumptions that I made and had expected. And so that was kind of like our first little point of contention, was me taking personally that they wanted to move rooms, and my not enoughs started to come up around. I had organized it and made it nice, and then it wasn't good enough. And so that kind of that felt not very exciting for me and didn't feel like a good start. And then there's already some resentment and whatnot related to the youngest. In most family systems, the youngest child often has a different experience depending on the age gap. And in this case, the youngest has got like a 7, 8, and 10-year age difference between the older group of kids. And so, my husband and I were different people when we were raising him. We had different socioeconomic status. We both had started our therapy journeys. And so we were very different parents. And so I think that the outside perception is that child, had it easier, better, et cetera. And there's probably a lot of truth to that, but there was not so much of a division of resources at that point because we no longer had 5 kids in the house. We only had 1. And so that just naturally is going to look very different. But it's hard when we have unresolved trauma to not see that for what it's worth and see it from a more adult perspective that probably any parent would have those differences in parenting when it came to the difference in age and birth order. So that was something that came into play. And so the youngest comes home and he ends up moving into the other room. He comes in with his own set of circumstances because he had just broken his wrist the day he was supposed to come. So he's dealing with, a lot of pain, and he's powerless and helpless and frustrated that he'll have to deal with this injury. He had already had a wrist surgery the year before. So a lot of his stuff was coming up around the powerlessness of not having your body work the way you want it to work. And so, I felt a bit protective over that as well, not wanting to have him further displaced after just having this injury at Christmas time. It's really not what anybody wants. And so we worked through that, and, he ends up staying in the other room, and they worked it out, and it turned out okay. And then, we had some plans to do, my husband does this, decorates our golf cart and wants to dress up like Santa, and I dress up like Mrs. Claus, and we drive through the neighborhoods and pass out candy canes, and it's really fun. But only 6 people fit on the golf cart. And so this would leave out several people, or we would be in small groups separating during different times if we wanted to go tour neighborhoods and look at lights and do this little outing. And so this was a main priority that my husband had because he was very excited about putting this really cute golf cart situation together. And he wanted to spend a lot of time doing that. And some of the other people in the group didn't want to necessarily be separated. And so there was a little bit of divisiveness over that, wanting to stay more together. And, either these people aren't happy or these people aren't happy, or my husband's not happy. And so it ends up being, there's not a lot of flexibility in expectations around, what I like to refer to Mel Robbins. She says this really cool thing called the let them theory. Like, let them take the kids, let them not take the kids, let them go for the golf cart ride, like just be more flexible with it. But I think because people had expectations, there was disappointments when those things didn't happen. And so the next lesson I would say would be recognizing that expectations almost always lead to disappointment, and having more candid conversations at the beginning of family experiences are really important. Meaning, what are you hoping to have? How would you like to spend your time? What ways can we work cooperatively to make sure that we all have our needs met and that there's balance in the time that we're going to spend together? And so having what I would call a pregame huddle would be a great recommendation for avoiding some of these types of disappointments because of expectations that are set, and making sure that we're clear about what we're hoping to gain and those things. The other thing that happened that created some hurt feelings for my husband and I is feelings of exclusion. And so, the couple that came into town, they wanted to see, our best friends for some of the time. And they were like aunt and uncles for them. And so they wanted to have some time alone with them. And because we didn't really have a lot of alone time with them, and we didn't have a lot of alone time with the son and his partner, it kind of felt like, why are they a priority when we're not, and can we go too, so that we could have time with you and them? And, that was not expressed very well on our parts in talking about the hurt feelings. And when attempted, I don't know that the hurt feelings were really understood. I can't really speak for them, but what I do know is recognizing that feelings of exclusion can sometimes be caught up, where cliques that have developed in family systems, make people feel like outliers or unincluded or even used. And so that can come up if we're not considering, how everybody will be feeling related to moments of inclusion or exclusion. And so having really candid conversations ahead of time about those moments can also be really important. And especially having room for all perspectives. Not to say that we're responsible for the feelings of someone else, but it is important that we do our best to listen and hear with an open heart and with compassion. So that was one of the other things that happened as far as our time spent. And then a couple of our sons still had their work obligations. And so they weren't able to be present for some of the different events. So, we had talked about going to the zoo, but then one of them would have to work too late and not be able to get there. And then that family didn't really want to come if they had to go separate and alone. And so there ended up being a little bit of a delay on my part in purchasing tickets. And so when we went to go ahead and do that for 2 different events, they were sold out. And so on my part, I didn't do a good job of just going, we're going to do this. I need a hard answer about who can make it, and I'm going to buy those tickets ahead of time. Or, hey, everybody, here's the link. Go ahead and pick up your tickets if you would like to go, and I can pay you back because I'm happy to cover it. But maybe put more of the onus of purchasing the tickets on other people. So again, delegating where possible or setting firm boundaries about certain things, because I think that everybody was pretty disappointed that we didn't get to go do a couple of the activities that we had previously discussed. And that was, again, I failed to get those tickets in a timely enough manner where they wouldn't be sold out. And so obviously the pinnacle of mental health is flexibility. But there was an expectation and a plan, and then it was failed due to being sold out. So that was another disappointment on an experience that happened over the holidays. And again, my failure was not just being more assertive, more boundaried around here's what we're going to do, here's when we're going to do it, and I'll go ahead and buy the tickets if you give me a yes by the end of today. And then whoever responded, they could go, and whoever didn't respond, perhaps they wouldn't be able to go. And so me being a bit codependent still about wanting to make sure everybody was included and would be there and that everyone's schedules would permit and all of these other things kind of ended up disappointing probably other people in the group. And so that was a bit of a disappointment. And so there was a few moments like that. And then my husband was in a bit of a bad mood about something one day, and my youngest son was kind of messing around and not kind of reading the room based on how my husband was being, and started messing with him and ended up spitting some water at him, which was maybe on another day would have been perceived as playful, but on this day did not land well. So he ends up losing his temper, and then that exacerbates the discomfort in some of the other kids in the house. And so there's this tension around that. And then, my youngest son's trauma from having had dad lose his temper at times, that gets kicked up. And so then there's a little bit of a disconnection there. And so that was a bit of a bummer, and it created a weird energy for a little while until there was some repair done on that. And so that was another little piece that kind of leads up to Christmas Day. So another piece is if there's conflict, we have to take responsibility for our part in that conflict, and we need to be willing to face that and circle back with some accountability and recognize when we have an empathic failure in a source of contention. And so I would say working on conflict and working through conflict and through discomfort is really essential in a family system, especially where there's going to be upset feelings at times when there's so many people that get together. And keep in mind, there's 5 kids, but there's also 2 in-laws and 5 grandkids, 6 grandkids that are part of this whole busy, crazy equation. So there's just a lot going on in our household, lots of moving parts, and a lot of people's histories that inform their reactions to things. So fast forward, we move into Christmas Day. And Christmas Day was pretty low key. We watch a movie, we have some mimosas, we hang out in our pajamas, we open presents. It wasn't too high strung. It was actually a pretty nice morning. But that said, we ended up, I'm making dinner. I had this really nice, prime rib, and it's going to be a dinner of, I think, 17 or 18 people or something. And about an hour before I'm ready to serve dinner, my youngest son is talking to a friend who has nowhere to go on Christmas. And he asks me, out loud in front of her, which that is always a pet peeve of mine. It's like, let me discuss this with you in private. He'll put me on the spot. But he asks me this question, is it okay if she joins us for Christmas dinner? Well, my husband and I always have the values of if someone doesn't have anywhere to go, we would always include them. If any of our kids had a friend or a partner, a girlfriend or a boyfriend or whatever that needed somewhere to go, we would always let them come. And so I'm like, the more the merrier. It's just fine. Well, my other son, who has a little bit of a history and some contempt for this son, he overhears this conversation. And he says, if he has a friend come, then I'm leaving. And I'm put in this position where it appears like I have to choose kids. But what I really have to look at myself is I have to choose my values. And my husband and I had already talked about the idea that we were just going to kind of let them, like if people wanted this or that or to leave or come or whatever, we were just going to let them. And we weren't going to try to manage how anybody was responding. And so although I was disappointed to hear that from the son that said he would leave, and I did say to him, I don't understand why you would leave. Like, why would we trade one person for being alone for another person for being alone? Like, that's not a good choice. We don't want you to leave. Why, please stay. But he was angry. And that came a bit from the history where a previous family experience really got messed up or ruined because the youngest son drank too much, brought a friend who also drank too much, and they kind of ruined the experience. And it happened to be on a birthday that of the one that wanted to leave. And so that had never got resolved between the two of them. So again, the past comes into this family dynamic, and I can see it all happening. And I'm just thinking, we already addressed it with the younger son. We said, that's not ever going to be acceptable again. You can't come if you're going to drink too much. We talked to the friend and said that was, it really was not okay that you guys ruined that event by being too intoxicated. It wasn't what we wanted for that experience. And so you'll be asked to leave if something like that ever happens again. Well, the son that wanted that to not happen again didn't know that was already addressed directly from the previous experience. And so he brings to the experience, like, I don't want to go through that again, which makes total sense. And doesn't realize that we're already prepared to set a boundary should anything like that ever happen again. We're not going to do that again, even on Christmas. And we already made that very clear with our youngest son. So back to the son that's going to leave, we're really disappointed, but we kind of go let them. And so he proceeds to go upstairs, and I'm upset, but I'm kind of just watching it all happen. The youngest son says, can we please talk about this? Why would you leave? I don't want you to leave. Like, please let me talk. And the older one refused to talk to him. And so and another area that should have changed was he went up to say goodbye to the ones that had traveled from the East Coast and say that he was going to leave. Well, they didn't want him to leave either. So then they got involved and, they were upset, like, don't leave, and got involved with, well, he shouldn't be able to invite someone to our family dinner if he doesn't get agreement from all of us. And, and then I hear all of this happening. And it's like, wait a second, but this is my house and I've invited everybody over, so I can actually invite whoever I want. And I don't really need anybody's opinion or permission for that matter. But I heard all that kind of going on. And then the youngest son is trying to go mitigate and problem solve. But at this point, the son that's going to leave is already really angry. And so I hear a really loud, yelling at the younger one, about that he's going to leave. And it sounds like they're going to get into a physical altercation. I'm downstairs. I can't see what's going on, but it sounds bad. And there was a history in our family where there was a physical altercation at one point when my two oldest were teenagers, and they got in a fight and they got arrested for domestic violence and all of this. So we have that history. So we hear the loud voice. My husband's upstairs. He hears the loud voice and he intervenes. And we have decided there will not be fighting in our house. Our house is small. We cannot have big adult men losing their temper and getting angry. So my husband comes in with what we call the chimp empire moment, and he comes in with the silverback voice, and he yells at everybody, this isn't going to happen. If you're going to act like this, you're going to get out. And he makes that pretty much a blanket statement to everybody. And even my youngest son, who was trying to solve the problem, but he should have just let him go, because he couldn't at that point. The one that was going to leave already made the decision to leave. So it exacerbated it. It should have just been left alone. But, and he owned that the next day. But my husband's big, scary voice then brings up in everybody else, that there's going to be something big happening. And it sounds like it's at the hands of Dad. We call it the chimp empire moment because he brings out the silverback and he's basically putting the smack down. Nobody's going to fight. This is not going to happen in our house. And if you're going to get violent or if you're going to get aggressive, you're out of here. Doesn't matter who you are. So the youngest son says, even me, and he says, yes, you're going to act like this, you're out. So everybody kind of leaves. My son that was upset about, the younger one having a guest come, he leaves first. But something I forgot is one of my other sons, who happens to also be a first responder, hears all of this and he darts up the stairs to try to avert the conflict and get involved, even though it really wasn't his place and there wasn't any physical fighting happening. It just sounded like it could be impending. And so that added to it, and he was heightened and his adrenaline was up and he hears the loud, scary voice like when he was a kid. And, fast forward, he goes up to try to solve the problem and alleviate with his first responder, instincts. And it just ended up making it even more volatile. And so although nobody got hit or anything else, there was certainly a lot of hurt feelings. And of course, I'm down in the kitchen like, what in the world? Like, I just wanted to have a nice dinner and have our kids have Christmas and, and everybody hears it and the grandkids hear it and everyone hears all this yelling. And it was just such a disappointment. So fast forward, the older ones end up, leaving, trying to go get him to stay, the one that stormed off. The younger one tries to go get him to come back. He doesn't want anything to do with it. He tries to go get the other brother to come back. He gets the door slammed on him. And so everybody's angry and volatile, and it's not getting solved tonight. Anyways, that was a bit of a disappointment. And of course, let everybody's expectations around what Christmas should have looked like down. I call it our chimp empire Christmas. It was just like all the boys got big with all their power and energy, and my husband was going to just be the bigger silverback. It's not happening in our house. And to that tune, if it were going to get escalated, I really do feel like he did what he needed to do, probably not without trauma goggles, having had a history of fighting in the house that really led to some bad times in our family. But that said, after it all went down, everybody kind of went their own ways. We did have sort of an okay enough dinner with those who, were able to downregulate and talk about it. But it did create a bit of a rift in the family for sure that night. And a lot of it hasn't been fully solved. Unfortunately, we're coming up on a year here and there hasn't been repair in all of the dynamics between all of the different people. And that's the part that's really hard for me, is there's not really anything I can do about that repair. But that said, I think that having an opportunity to return and take accountability is really important. So my husband, being the patriarch, he sent out a really beautiful message. And he took accountability and he said, everyone brought a different perspective to that night. And he asked everyone to reflect on what they might have changed in their reactions and responses, and asked and invited for a conversation to be revisited around what could be different. And he really toiled over that message. And I thought he did a beautiful job on everything that he sent, and the invitation for everyone to talk, with him primarily. I think, he got a bit of the bad guy role because he was the one that got so loud, that culminated the end of all of it. And interestingly, very next morning, the youngest and him had a really good talk. And I was part of that, and it went really well. There was a smoothing out. The oldest that wasn't involved in it, we talked with him and he seemed to be okay. It was like, it wasn't involving me, so I just stayed out of it. It took a little while for one of the other sons to circle back and talk to us, but he was really responsible about it. And he just said, I want to talk with you guys, but I just want to know how I feel and what I want. And I want to be really clear so that I can address it with integrity and responsibility. And so that took him a while. I think it took him bit over a month, but he did circle back and we were able to have a beautiful reparative conversation and have since spent all kinds of time in reconnection together. And so of the 5, 3 of them were able to have connection and repair, and that feels really good. The one that lives really far away, we have yet to be able to make a good conversation about that. There's a lot of history with him in our family system in general, just because he sort of joined us at a later date and wasn't part of the evolution of the family system and what it even means to be in our family system. All of that wasn't part of his whole story. It was pretty late in high school when he joined us. And then the other son, who I'm sure felt incredibly wronged, because I'm going to make up that he probably felt that that the younger son was chosen over him. My husband and I talked about that at length, and it wasn't the case. It was just that our values of inclusion were chosen over one or other of one of our kids. And so, I feel true to those values, and I was prepared to set the boundaries I would have needed to set should anything go wrong with my youngest. But that said, there's a lot of hurt that still exists, and a lot of sadness over the disconnection of that son who hasn't really been willing to talk to us since that day. And so I would just say that recognizing we all have discourse in our family systems. We all have unresolved pain points. And I think that the last lesson is really about realizing that you have to be true to your values, even if it creates disconnection in any of your family members, because otherwise you're then being codependent and unhealthy, and you're trying to manage someone else's emotional reaction. The other thing that I think is important to take away from this as a lesson is that we really don't have any control over the way in which people are willing to circle back and have discussion. And depending on attachment styles, if someone is a really avoidant attachment style, they are likely not going to be willing to circle back at the same pace. And it's my hope that does happen. I certainly miss the one who hasn't been in contact with us. But, we have to also honor that healing is a journey, and it's not linear, and it requires patience sometimes, and understanding that those things do not necessarily happen on our time. So acceptance in the powerlessness that everybody is at a different pace in their healing journey is the last lesson that I would leave you with. So I hope that you find this helpful, and that you can take some of the lessons that we learned from our holiday gone wrong last year, and are able to preemptively apply some of those things that you may have learned from our experience in your own family systems, and realizing that we need to temper our expectations, have clear conversations about desires and what's going to be good for everybody, realizing you need to, once you set a plan in motion, just follow through with the plan, even if sometimes people are unable to fully commit, and then keep in mind the values that you hold true to you, so that you can be congruent as far as what you need to do to maintain healthy space and time in your family system and in relationship with others. So that's all that I have for you today. Feel free to ask questions in the comments. I'll do my best to get back to you. But hopefully you took some of those lessons and can apply them for your holidays. And happy holidays. And until we meet again, don't forget to lead with love. It'll never steer you wrong.